Now.com. It's setting up to be a very different kind of 4th of July weekend. We got 2 hours of nonstop coverage for you from around the country. Let's just pop in to one of the many Florida beaches right now that are unfortunately going to be shut down this holiday weekend as Florida is seeing surging coronavirus numbers. Of course, Texas is, and right here in Arizona, we are too, seeing more than 4,000 cases just today. So we'll have those numbers for you and so much more. But let's get right into it, everybody. We have this Friday edition. It is me and Ron Hoon back together again for some of your top stories here of the day regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. Ron, how you doing today?
Doing great, Mike. Hope you had a nice week off last week. Did you go back to the Chicagoland? Where'd you go?
Well, I was supposed to. If this whole coronavirus thing wasn't happening, that was the agenda.
Yeah, of course.
But then I just had to say, you know what? It's just not worth it right now. So.
Right. Yeah, I know.
And now
I got some time off in.
Oh, I was just going to say.
I got some time off in July, and my plan right now is hop in the car and go somewhere.
There you go.
I don't know. We'll all get back to flying eventually. A lot of folks aren't there quite yet.
I know. And did you see what Chicago is doing now with the if you land there, you got to quarantine for 14 days if you're coming from Arizona. So couldn't.
Are you kidding me? When did that go into effect?
They just started that last night.
Oh, for goodness sake!
Yeah. So that would be much of a.
I don't know. You know what's really interesting, Mike, is when New York they really were the epicenter of the virus, and people kept asking out here in Arizona, these flights keep landing from New York, and there's nobody there to talk to these people as they come in. Are we going to implement any kind of a plan? Eventually, a certain number of states, I believe it actually started with Florida, said, okay, we are actually going to implement some sort of quarantining. It's sort of antithetical to the United States way of doing business. I mean, we are one big country.
Right.
And it's interesting because I don't know. I mean, does that also mean that if you drive to Chicago and you have an Arizona plate, they'll pull you over and tell you to go get into a quarantine situation?
Yeah, it is. It's really bizarre. You would think that would be the case too. I don't know, but geez.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well.
Yeah. It's setting up.
Yeah, I mean, I saw Florida, they reported today almost 10,000 new cases, about 9,500. I was actually impressed that here on the holiday, but then our state also reported about 4,400 new cases. So the hope, I don't know what your experience has been, Mike, but the more I go out to, say, the grocery store, to me it looks like we're getting pretty close to 100% of people, I'd say a good 90% plus, who are wearing the masks, whether you like it or not, and plenty of folks don't like wearing the mask, but we got to get these numbers down, and that's the goal, and that sounds like the plan for how to move forward.
Yeah, that does seem the plan, and that's what I'm seeing too when you go to the grocery store. You're right there, 95%, I would say. But when we heard Governor Doug Ducey earlier this week saying that this coming week, next week, could be even worse. Think about that, what those numbers would be then.
I know. Well, I will just say they had 20,272 tests reported in the last 24 hours. And we have a lot of locations and people are getting in their cars and they're waiting in long lines. But the problem is the cases per 100,000 here in Arizona are now well over 1,200 per 100,000. And you go back, and I'm just looking at mid-June, and at that point, the cases were in the 600 per 100,000. Now we're at 1,200 per 100,000. So if you just break it out, because it's really not fair to do apples to oranges, you've got a state like California that's got such greater population than, say, the state of Arizona. But if you just look at it in terms of our population, basically, based on our population overall per capita, our numbers have actually doubled in about a 2 to 2.5 week time frame.
Yeah. That is not what we want to hear, though, there at all.
Well, I think a lot of folks took a look at it, Mike, early on. You know, shortly after the governor had lifted the stay-at-home order on May 15th, we actually flew over the top of a rooftop bar that was so jam-packed with people right here in the valley. Almost immediately, I think it raised the question on a lot of people's minds, like, so are there any rules right now? Or are you just nicely asking people to do social distancing? Because it wasn't working. And then there was the delay. There were cities that were saying to the state, look, we've got to do something. Eventually, the governor did. A lot of folks wondered why it took so long. And then the new controversy was that health clubs were included when a lot of folks thought primarily it was going to be the bars. Now, that'll be interesting because from what I read on social media last night, there's supposed to be a court hearing on Monday for this suit that has come from the health club industry aimed at the state government. And we'll see what happens just in the next few days.
Yeah, really. And even before that, Ron, less than 2 hours away, some of the health clubs here in Arizona have until noon today to cease operations for a while, but we'll see if that'll happen. So that'll be interesting, too. I know Lifetime is in the mix. Mountainside is also there, so we'll see what they do.
I wondered what was up with that new deadline, because they had already given the original deadline was the governor spoke Monday afternoon at, I think, around 4.
Right.
And said it all has to go into effect at 8 o'clock tonight. So that seemed like the real deadline. You know, my understanding is a lot of the health clubs felt like they were not given any form of due process. Some legal analysts have looked at it and said they feel like these businesses actually have a pretty good case that they want to be given some sort of due process, at least in the state of Arizona, before the government can shut them down a second time.
Yeah, we'll see just how it all shakes out, and if people will be still working out or if they won't even be allowed in the doors. We'll know in the next couple of days there for sure. But right now, Ron, I'm showing what would be the main event for any 4th of July celebration tomorrow. It is, of course, the fireworks. The fireworks shows that so many towns and communities would put on. You know, there was a number out there, according to this Fox News article, Ron, that over 16,000 fireworks shows across the country happen every July 3rd and July 4th weekend. And now they are saying that less than 5% of those will actually happen. And that's really hurting the business for these firework operators that put on these magnificent shows.
Yeah, you can understand. Now, particularly here in Arizona, we just always have concerns around the 4th of July. We do put on some great shows here in the Metro Phoenix area, but there are always concerns up in the forest lands, and we've had some pretty bad fires this particular summer already. We just count on the summer rains, which usually, by the way, start around the 4th of July. But it's understandable that you just do not want to attract a large crowd right now, so you have cities, in some cases, still trying to figure out ways to do it, but social distance. You know, they had been talking, for example, in Mesa about having people watch from their cars, that kind of thing. A lot of cities have canceled it. And it's just so interesting, Mike, on an almost everyday basis, because we've never seen anything like this in our lifetime. What's been happening from one industry to the next. Up until a week ago, who even stopped to think that the people who put on these fireworks shows, which is part of Americana, that they would be on the verge of financial collapse? Now, of course, we think about it because here's the 4th of July and the vast majority of shows are canceled. We just had a story this morning that over 1,000, in fact, I think around 1,500 of the biggest names in music wrote a letter to the government in London. I'm talking about Paul McCartney, the Rolling Stones were on this thing, Eric Clapton, Ed Sheeran, saying save live music. They're just trying to call attention to the fact that in the UK alone there are over 200,000 people that rely on the business of live music to make their living. And so they're reaching out to their government now saying, look, something needs to be done. Something's got to be done because there's another industry that you, up until a few weeks ago, you might not have even thought about. We all thought right away about the airlines, the hotels, the car rental businesses, the restaurants. We thought about all of that, but just the domino effect of worldwide economies shutting down, it's like something none of us have seen in our lifetime. I mean, the hope for a vaccine just grows by the day. All the reports, by the way, are very positive that we hopefully will be getting there, and potentially around the end of the year or first part of next year. But President Trump, we talk politics, by the way, folks, a lot on this show, and he has said that he views 2021 as almost like a rocket ship that could go straight up as once they get the vaccines rolled out, to really get the economy going. I think Joe Biden probably needs to address that because there is the one thing in all the polling that shows the most positively for President Trump's hoped for re-election is people do definitely give him the credit for being amongst the two candidates who would do the best job of getting the economy restarted. He doesn't do nearly as well in so many other categories. But that might be one vulnerability that Joe Biden needs to look at as well. The economy, Mike, let's face it, nobody wants to get this. Nobody wants to get this disease. And as the numbers roll on and the numbers grow every day, the big question mark that's out there is, where will we be in the economy? I mean, you take a look at the V shape of the stock market's recovery. It's been pretty remarkable.
Yes.
And the market operates 6 to 9 months in advance. The market is assuming that the great scientific minds of the United States and other nations will be able to come up with a vaccine so that we can get things going again. That's a really positive sign. But ultimately, when we're living in the middle of it, nobody really knows.
No, they don't know. And well, I think at this moment, though, Ron, people do know that they won't see normal again until this vaccine happens. I mean, think about it. We tried to get back going here in Arizona. For a couple of weeks, for a month, we were trying to, the restaurants were back. We were trying to get some sort of normalcy going, and then they just dial us back in because, well, some people just were out and about too much. And now we're dealing with the second time of a shutdown.
Yeah, I know. It's really frustrating. And the thing that is frustrating about the timing on this one is you have virtually every school district, K through 12 around the country trying to figure out how are we going to get schools started once again. It wasn't that long ago that it looked like the plans were moving along, at least here in Arizona, pretty efficiently. But then when you see this huge spike, then you see at the University of Arizona, their president saying, hold on. If these numbers continue the way we're seeing them, or if this trend line continues and it gets even worse, I can't see reopening the campus. Well, if you don't reopen the campus at one of the major universities here on the West Coast, then how does that impact the sports world? Because, you take a look at the Pac-12, which is the big football conference out here on the West Coast. They've all said, all the university presidents and the commissioner, we are not going to play football if the campuses aren't reopened. So there's just this domino effect. We had people who were out naively over the course of a few weeks thinking, hey, this virus, maybe it sort of kind of went away, which was never the message. It was go out there, but be very careful and be considerate of others and do your social distancing. Keep those masks handy. And it just all went south. And so now we're not quite sure how things are going to go with the school year out here in Arizona. We usually start in early August. We're a few weeks away. We're a month away. What do you do now? What do you do when universities normally would be opening later in the month of August? The timing of this surge it's really disappointing because it's just creating so much more uncertainty, and not just in the world of education.
That's true. And Ron, did you ever think that during a presidential election time, an election year, that really the election year is second fiddle to all this COVID coverage. I mean, it's really like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
And then in November there will be an election, but first, I mean, it's something.
Yeah. You know what's really, really interesting, Mike, and you're a student of history just like I am. To me, this is one of the most fascinating parts of the entire political world that we exist in right now. In 2016, President Trump, Donald Trump at the time, obviously loved doing these huge rallies and getting the crowd chanting and packing people into the arenas, and the lines were long of thousands who couldn't get inside. And, we have just seen over the course of many, many, many election cycles, candidates rolling up their sleeves and getting out there right in the thick of the crowds, and doing what they could to really generate excitement. Now, 100 years ago, or 125 years ago in our country, that's not how presidential campaigns were run. In fact, it was considered almost bad taste for the presidential candidates to actually get out there and campaign themselves. They would let surrogates do it.
Wow.
So I am not going to be shocked, Mike, and I have not made this prediction yet.
Okay.
This is the first time I've done it, and we like to talk politics on this show, everybody. I am not going to be shocked if we go back to the future here in 2020, and Joe Biden in particular, who has been doing just fine in the polls, staying at his house, I'm not going to be shocked if that is most of his entire presidential campaign, is a digital campaign, is a virtual campaign, whether he does it from the basement or he does it somewhere else in the house. It's interesting because we might be headed toward that kind of election, and the president might still go out and have some of his rallies and say things like, "Come on, Joe, come on out of your house," that kind of a thing.
Right.
But what is the incentive for Joe Biden to do so if he continues to rise so high in the polls?
Yeah, if you see these poll numbers that continue to be in his favor, I mean, why leave the house then? But on the same token, you got to bring back 2016 when they talk about those poll numbers, though, because a lot of people are saying, but wait a minute, if you guys did the poll numbers back in 2016, isn't Hillary the president by now?
Right.
So there's going to be a lot. There's going to be a lot of that talk too.
No, that's a good point. Yeah, I mean, people were the polling organizations. They had some real egg on their face in 2016, and we can only hope, because every organization is different. None of them are controlled by the government. They're all, independent private businesses, and or else they're run by a university, etc. But let's just hope that they are tweaking their election models with a mea culpa built into the fact that they got it so wrong in 2016. What do you have to do to make sure this time around your polls are more accurate? Because, Mike, you raise a great point. They really missed in 2016.
Yeah, that was a miss, and if it's a miss again, that would really put some egg on their face there as well. But we will see on November 4th, the day after, Ron. Yeah. I'm sure that will be a show like none other then.
Yeah, and then, Mike, remember 4 years ago, Mike and I, you guys, and our other digital journalists, we would sit around and we'd say, gosh, what are we even going to talk about once the election's over?
Yeah, we thought.
We've just been through 4 of the most unbelievable years you would ever want to see.
Yeah,
I mean, the interest in politics is, if you ask me, is pretty close to an all-time high. Oh, and by the way, the year 2020 has been pretty incredible. Did you see there was a meme that was going around the other day, Mike? It was Doc Brown sitting in the DeLorean with Michael J. Fox, and he, and the flux capacitor's right behind him, and he says, "Whatever you do, don't put it on 2020."
Yeah, you don't want to go there. Yeah.
Don't go to 2020. Pick some other year. Oh man,
that's good. That was a good one.
Hopefully, at least we're to the point now that we, can have a little bit of fun, because frankly, this year, Mike, with what the virus has done, and consider it was really right at the start of the year, right in January, that we started to see it spreading in China, and it started to pop up in Italy, and it has come to the United States, and it hasn't let go. And one of the disappointing things, I do think, Mike, is this. A lot of us hoped that just like most viruses, it would die out in the summertime. It's just not happening.
No, it's ramped up.
Yes, no, it's gone exactly that way, and that's just a reflection of how transmittable it really is, how contagious this particular virus is. By the way, Mike, there was a story, it was such a touching and emotional and heartbreaking story coming out of California. There was a fellow, 51 years old, in Lake Elsinore, California, who his family says he was doing such a good job. He took it so seriously with the social distancing and just making sure he was very thoughtful in how he protected others in his family and his circle of friends to make sure that there were masks or social distancing, that kind of thing. So he did decide to go to one party. He thought, there was a group of friends getting together, I'm going to go to this party. And this, by the way, this story comes from our friends at Fox 11 in LA. And he did go to the party, and then a few days later, he gets a phone call from somebody who had been at that party. I want to say the man's name was Tommy Macias.
Mm-hmm.
And he gets a phone call from somebody else who'd been to the party saying, I'm so sorry, but I have tested positive for COVID-19, so I recommend that you and everybody who was at the party. Well, he goes and gets tested, and sure enough, he got the virus. He posted a few days on social media about how sorry he was because he'd had it for a while without knowing, and he had then spread it to other members of his family. He particularly mentioned his mom and some of his sisters, and he just felt so bad, and he said, with God's help, hopefully I'm going to get through this okay. He died the very next day after posting all of that online. 51 years old. We're not talking about somebody who was 85 here. We're talking about a man who was in his young 50s. So it just serves as a good warning for all of us. We still need to take this thing seriously.
Yeah, very serious at that, Ron, and it really just shows you, you know what's going to happen, Ron? At the end of 2020, at the end of this year, people are going to be at New Year's Eve parties, and they're not even going to want the countdown. They're just going to want to speed it up and say, get this year over with. Let's go. Let's go right into 2020. Right. We don't need the ball drop. There's no big celebration. It wasn't a great year. Let's go.
Yeah. Right. I mean, what about that? What about the tradition of people coming to Times Square? Is that even going to happen?
No.
You know what's interesting, Mike? We're in July. When we were dealing with this in March and April, I think most of us assumed that we were going to flatten the curve and life was going to be back to pretty close, hopefully, to normal by the month of July.
Right.
Well, that's just not what's happening right now. We are definitely in the middle of a second surge, and you just wonder, if everybody does their part here over the next week or two, can we flatten the curve a second time?
Yeah, you know it's going to be different this weekend when if people go to a 4th of July, get together with a family. Now it's not going to be, oh, did you remember to bring the potato salad? It's now, did you remember to bring the potato salad and your mask? Bet you never thought you'd have that combo ever, and now that is what we're dealing with, but that's the state of the facts.
Yeah, Mike, it's exactly right. Matter of fact, one of the experts that we had heard from earlier today on the show, over on Fox 10, right next door, had said it wouldn't be a bad idea for you to just jot down, for whoever comes over for 4th of July, for you to jot down everybody who was, if it's at your house or if you're at somebody else's house, just jot down the names of everybody who was there. Because over the course of this great big country of ours, as people to get together over 4th of July, and people will wear masks, but there are going to be some instances of the virus spreading. And he said, look, just jot down every name so that if the worst happens, you can then reach out to people right away and say, sorry, but I tested positive, or somebody else who was at the party tested positive. Make sure you get yourself checked out ASAP.
Yeah, that's a good idea there, right there. No doubt about it, Ron. Well, it's always great talking with you, Ron. We started this show up on this Friday, bringing everyone the news of the day, and on this 4th of July weekend, Ron, it's always great to talk with you, and enjoy the weekend.
Mike, same to you. Happy 4th of July. Happy Independence Day. Nice to see you working on what officially is a company holiday. Let's all be safe this weekend, and we'll see you all next week.
Yes, absolutely. And I should point this out, Ron. I think this is our record for a segment. We're at 25 minutes. I don't think we ever pushed it that way, Ron.
Wow, man, that's how you squeeze 15 minutes into a 25-minute show.
Yeah, the fastest 15 just have to be extended just a little bit more. It's a pandemic. We have to.
There you go.
All right,
Yeah,
Ron, thanks
we
so
have
much for
to.
talking. We appreciate it.
Sure.
And coming up next here on News Now, everybody, we got Dr. Mike on deck. He's going to give us the very latest, what he is seeing across the country regarding this pandemic. Don't go anywhere. We're back in just 2 minutes.